We will now discuss a topic that has become a core issue in the last 2 years for the EU, and that is energy security as a common challenge. Major shifts are on the way that will lead to a different global energy system by 2030 and beyond. We all know that geopolitical tensions, the rise in global energy prices, and also climate change require a multifold transition to ensure energy security, energy access, affordability as a condition for the sustainable economic growth and also competitiveness for the EU and its partners. And our third panel here gathers, as you will see, key international voices for a multi-dimensional perspective on green transition in Europe and the world. And I have now the pleasure to invite Mr. Thomas Östros, Vice President of the European Investment Bank, who will set the scene for this panel, which will be led by Jean-Christophe Laloux, who is the Director General and also Head of Operations of the EIB. Mr. Östros, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Dear Commissioner, panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad that there is so big interest in the important issue of energy security and energy transition. The question today is not if we want to, but how to achieve an energy security that is sustainable, just and affordable in Europe and beyond. A lot has already been done, especially after the brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine, that showed really the importance to regain our energy sovereignty. Transition to clean energies is obviously an imperative to protect the life of future generations on our planet. But it's also a necessity to safeguard the competitiveness of our industries and our economic prosperity. The European Union devotes vast public resources to this transition, and the EIB stands behind that effort. Last year, we signed more than 26.8 billion euros of new financing for clean energy and natural resource projects. And together, we have just launched a dedicated package of support to Repower EU, committing an additional 45 billion euros over the next years on top of our regular lending to support clean energy investments and Europe's green industry. A significant share of EIB financing is earmarked for risky, highly innovative investments. We seek to de-risk these investments and crowd in private capital. As an example, we did that with the offshore wind farms when that sector was still at its infancy. And today we are doing it again in the floating wind farm sector with projects outside the coast of Portugal and France. But we are also sometimes very agile and quick in our responses, even if we are also slow sometimes. When the European wind power industry got into the quite stressful situation as it did last year, not least, we had conversations, of course, with the Commissioner Kadri Simpson, and we decided under the leadership of Jean-Christophe Laloux to try to be helpful. And we created an additional 5 billion euro package of immediate support to the European wind power sector. Crucially, we are not just financing renewables, energy storage, grids, or energy efficiency. We are also expanding our scope to the state-of-the-art manufacturing capacities in strategic net zero technologies. For many areas, like electricity production, clean solutions are already cheaper and faster to deploy than fossil fuels. But for others, like aviation or heavy industry, we still need clean alternatives which are economical. We target, for example, hard-to-abate sectors such as steel production, where green hydrogen is a solution, as H2 Green Steel project shows. That project was also referred by our president this morning. That is why innovation is key. And that is why EIB Group launched the European Tech Champions Initiative, a fund of funds that will provide much-needed late-stage growth capital to European innovators. Moreover, our funding will be used to support investment in critical raw materials. And there we are also actively engaging in global gateway initiatives that aims to scale up strategic partnerships. We work closely with, for instance, the African Development Bank alongside other European peers to offer adapted financing to African markets for clean energy deployment. Energy is needed for socio-economic development, for education, health, manufacturing, digital solutions, to name a few. So, ladies and gentlemen, for all this, we need firm and long-term policy commitments and conducive and stable business frameworks. Industrials, like private investors, need certainty, clarity, and efficiency. We need scaled-up and blended resources, and we need to address technical and regulatory bottlenecks and challenges. And we need, of course, to support companies that are agile, committed, and that are deploying solutions for a sustainable future. All these topics are at the heart of the discussion that will take place now among our high-level panelists. Let me thank you very much for your attention and give the floor to Jean-Christophe to lead this debate. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for all being there. Let me first of all introduce our panelists of the day, starting with Mrs. Kadri Simpson, the European Commissioner for Energy. To her left, Mrs. Claire Vaison, who is Executive Vice President and Secretary General of ENGIE and an old friend of EIB, since we reminded ourselves that she sat on the board of EIB quite a number of years ago. To her left, Dr. Kevin Kariuki, Vice President of the African Development Bank. To his left, Mrs. Giuseppina di Foggia, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Terna, also a very close partner of EIB. And all to your right, Mrs. Elga Bartsch, who is Director General at the Federal Ministry of Economy and Climate in Germany. So the theme of the day is energy security as a common challenge. So we're going to divide the session in two rounds of questions and answers. First, to my fellow panelists. There are 5 of you. We have twice 25 minutes to try to take a bit of Q&A. So let's be very punctual with the time, and I'll be very grateful. Otherwise, I'll nudge you a little bit. Please accept my apologies in advance. So we'll divide the session in 2 rounds of questions, and then hopefully have a bit more time for Q&A at the end. So let's start with you, Commissioner Simpson. So the European Commission is, as we all know, very big on climate and energy in particular. The Vice President reminded us of some of the things we have done together on the wind package. We can also mention, of course, the Green Deal, REPowerEU. Now, in your view, what are the main priorities and challenges for us to achieve the ambitions of the Fit for 55, and that in particular in the context of us developing a real sovereignty in terms of energy, and in particular in terms of renewable energy generation? Where is it that we collectively as Europeans must put all of our forces and priorities?
Thank you for this question, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. It is very timely because I'm coming just back from Strasbourg, where yesterday we presented our 2040 targets. So on top of what we are doing to achieve minus 55% CO2 reduction by the end of this decade, we do feel from European Commission that our responsibility is to give a predictability and to create stability for the clean tech market by providing also the foresight for 2040. And you all know that this is already in our climate law, that by 2050 European Union will be climate neutral. So this has been some heavy work in previous years. Our Fit for 55 package is now completed. All the energy files are agreed with our co-legislators, and that means that 27 member states are finalizing also their national energy and climate plans that help us to deliver significantly higher targets both on renewables and on energy efficiency by 2030. but we do understand that there are some burdens that still withhold our speed. And I'm saying that despite the fact that past 2 years have been record years for renewables in the European Union. So since Russia started to manipulate our fossil fuel market, it was clear that green transition is a positive response to get rid of this vulnerability. And since Russia started its unjustified war against Ukraine and stopped significant shares of deliveries of natural gas to Europe, we have been able to balance the gas market, mainly by prioritizing savings, but also by replacing, where it was possible, natural gas with renewables. So past 2 years brought online 130 gigawatts of new solar and wind capacity across Europe, and these are both records. But we have to accelerate our transition, both for achieving 2030 targets and to cut CO2 emissions by 90% by the end of next decade. So what do we need to do for that? We need to
and if I
unlock
may
financing.
nudge you a little bit, Commissioner, on that, and before you tell us what we need to do, don't you think we risk also replacing a dependence by another? Like, say, for example, if all the electrolyzers are coming from a particular part east of us to fabricate the green hydrogen, or if all the wind towers are imported from the same part, which is east of us, are we not going to replace one dependence, Russian fossil fuel, by another?
This is a very valid question, and of course everybody understands that being too dependent on one single supplier is risky. And to avoid that, actually, yesterday was also a very good day in this regard, that we managed to complete negotiations on Net Zero Industry Act. And this is a legislation designed exactly to support clean tech industry here in Europe. And we are covering a wide range of necessary technologies, starting with wind and solar, geothermal, even SMRs, and that brings me also to the packages that were not legislative packages but action plans, and I want to mention two of them. One is our wind power action plan, and I'm really grateful for the very good cooperation that we had with EIB, because what we do see right now is that wind industry is still this industry where European companies do hold global leadership. We want them to take their fair share of this growing global market for renewables, because one of the biggest deliverables of COP28 was agreement that we will triple renewables. So that means that market for renewables will grow, and we want to support our producers in this regard. But the developers here in Europe, they faced difficulties. First of all, permitting took too long, and that made them vulnerable towards price increases. So thank you, EIB, for helping them to set up counter guarantee scheme. And the other action plan is our grid action plan, because we can bring online renewables, intermittent renewables, only if our grids are digitalized and up to task. And that means that we have very clear assessments what we need to do to connect future offshore wind farms with mainland, but also to allow transport sector to electrify and small producers to connect their production sites. Okay. So grid action plan, wind power action plan are the latest novelties from our side.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So I take indeed from your intervention predictability that you mentioned in the beginning, which is very important, indeed very often mentioned by the industry. It's important that we stay the course and that we do not deviate also in terms of carbon price and the ETS and the other trading mechanism, and a number of very important Net Zero Industry Act and a number of new plans. Turning now to Mrs. Bartsch. What is your perspective, Mrs. Bartsch, in terms of how you see things from your perspective as a member state? And very curious to hear also about the particular situation in Germany, where we know that the energy question is probably the highest ever on the agenda and very relevant for the German industry in particular. Do you see that the solutions proposed by the European Commission are sufficient? How do you see that issue about energy in Germany in the coming years?
Yes, thank you very much. So let me sort of broaden the picture a little bit beyond energy, because I do think that we need to look at the challenges that are being posed to the global trade and the multilateral trading system at the moment, because it crystallizes in an extreme way in the energy question, but it is embedded in larger geoeconomic fragmentation, and the weaponization of trade is been particularly dramatic in energy recently, as was already mentioned. But it's not unique to energy, and as a result, I think we sort of need to consider this in a broader context. Often, I think, when we think of the various challenges and trade-offs that we're trying to balance. It was already mentioned by the Commissioner that as we sort of reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, there will be new dependencies emerging. And in the future, also climate change itself will continue to impact the planet in a more profound way, will also add an additional dimension, I think, to the challenges that we are facing globally, and also with respect to the supply of various goods, materials, and so on. So the challenges often appear daunting, but I don't think that means that we should curb our ambitions, to sort of answer your question, but on the contrary, because it is clear to me that the green transition offers many opportunities, not just to increase energy security, but also to increase climate and economic resilience, and also, and that sort of connects, I think, this panel to the previous one, also the opportunity to foster greater regional value creation through renewable energy and the way that it affects the regional structures of the economy. And I think it is great to see that the European Union's toolbox to foster the energy transition and to strengthen energy security, but also to do the same thing for overall economic resilience, is expanding. And I think in this context, it is important that we keep European markets as open as possible for trade and investment, while protecting them against valid security risks, because that will allow us to navigate these increasingly difficult challenges. And a key aspect, I think, that also was mentioned throughout the day, is not just to look outside the European Union and our relationship to the rest of the world, but also to focus on our own strength, and that means deepening the single market, maybe adjusting it where it's necessary, completing the capital market union, because all of these steps will go a long way to increase our resilience and sort of enhance, and not just energy security, but also energy affordability. And I think we have seen this coming together already after the Russian attacks on the Ukraine in a major way within Europe.
And if I may just to pick up on one of the remarks you have made, very interesting on trade. You have put the notion of trade with the notion of energy security and green transition. So you don't think that at the moment we should modify our practices in terms of trade, or potentially shield the European industry in certain ways or certain parts compared to what it is now?
I think we need to make these policies climate and also security aware. Yeah. And I think that to some extent does away with maybe a certain naivety that or faith that many of us had until just a few years ago, and now we are realizing that we are seeing some seismic shift in the geopolitical landscape that is giving rise to this, I think, lasting and potentially also increasing fragmentation. And that means, I think, that we need to diversify, both in trade, but also in energy partnerships.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Bartsch. I'll come back to you for the second round of question now. Over to Madame Vaison. So you have here the perspective of the private sector and an industrial player, and then a very important one. You have committed, and NG has committed to a net zero carbon strategy by 2045. So let me just put very generically the question: where are the main pain points for you in terms of developing this strategy? And also, potentially, do you have a feedback to either one of us financing you or potentially putting policy on you? So where does NG really look at in terms of development of your strategy? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. And indeed, Jean-Christophe, as you were reminding me, we had some time together, and it's great to be back here and to see a number of friendly faces in the room. So I'm now sitting indeed on the other side of action. Both sides are important, the other side being in the industrial sector. I'm part of ENGIE. So ENGIE is an energy group which is active across different energies and with a global footprint. And also with a very significant European presence, of course, more than, I would say, around, well, more than half certainly, and around probably 2/3 of our, or 3/4 of our activities are here in Europe, in a number of geographies, be it France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Romania. So present in a number of geographies, and indeed active in the energy transition. We put more than 3/4 of our growth investment capex into energy transition, be it renewable energy or be it what we call decentralized solutions to decarbonize, such as district heating and cooling. And here we have a very nice help from the EIB on this one, as well as local energy production, green energy production facilities. So our activity is developing here in Europe and elsewhere. What we see as important, of course, is the public framework that is put in place. And here, I think it's great that we are in Europe ahead of other continents, I would say, in terms of setting ourselves some ambitious targets. We certainly very much welcome the ambition that are set to decarbonize the European economy. And it's, I mean, the more you give clarity to the actors, the more we will be able, of course, to invest and to align our investments. What I would add, however, is that it's great to set ourselves target. It's also great to pay attention to the industrial dimension. Yes. Of how we get there. The risk otherwise is that we will put a lot of money, a lot of investments into new renewable production, for instance, and you were mentioning it, Jean-Christophe, largely with inputs from other areas, which can be fine, but raises issues in terms of security of supply, and can also and resilience, and can also raise issue in terms of how much it creates activity and employment here in Europe. So we need obviously to find a balance. And I think the idea here is, of course, not to close the European continent, not to slow down energy transition, but to find a balance, both setting ourselves ambitious targets and paying attention to the industrial dimension of it. And in this respect, I think I very much welcome the fact that the Commission is making progress on the Net Zero Industrial Act, and that the Belgian presidency right now is putting a lot of importance on this.
Let me address, however, I understand, maybe a bit tricky question, but you represent the private sector industrial side together with Terna, but it is very often said that in Europe we're very good at regulation and you're very good at the stick, but you think we're good enough with a carrot. Is there enough of a business case which is made for someone like ENGIE? Because you mentioned importance of the public, what you mentioned, the public framework, which is important, all the legislation, but there still needs to be a business case down there, right? Do you think it's sufficient at the moment?
Of course. So we need, energy, everywhere the energy sector is a sector that is regulated. And I would say normally so, we are important in public policies. However, being regulated doesn't mean killing the business cases or business initiatives. And here again, what we feel is that we need to recognize what the private sector can do and what private money can do. And that's key, of course, because most of the energy transition will have to come from the private initiative and the private money. And some schemes, when I think, for instance, about the electricity market, well, we see a lot of room for private initiative. We see a lot of room for PPAs, power purchase agreement, to develop between producers and companies that do need the electricity. And we think that this can cover a large part of the visibility need of the sectors, both the energy sector and the industrial sector that needs the energy. So we do see a lot of room that should be left to this kind of private scheme, together with the ability for mechanisms such as CFD for less mature technology. And I would say more broadly that we do see the need for public action, in particular to help emerging technologies. Yep. There are some technologies that are very mature, other ones less so. And when I think, for instance, about biomethane, which is a green gas, there are several ways to produce biomethane. One is out of agricultural waste. That's the first generation. The second generation is out of wood and residuals that are kind of burned. That's called pyrogasification. Well, this is an emerging technology. It's a very promising one. And it's in that kind of instances that we really do need a public intervention and public support.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Visançon. I take indeed public framework important, but also the industrial dimension, and still a lot of room for private sector to be able to act. And indeed, we will come back on the notion of financing in the second round of questions. Turning now to Dr. Kariuki and taking a bit of distance from Europe, not so much actually. We are only a few kilometers apart. So the African Development Bank is indeed very active in the energy transition, in developing renewable energy, and sometimes we do this also together, which is always nice. So, what is, in your view, the key bottlenecks when it comes to the development of renewable energy across the African continent in particular, and what similarities do you see with the European challenge, or dissimilarities?
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. I think it is true that AFDB has tried to be at the lead as far as transition is concerned. And to date, I think we are sitting on about 87% of our portfolio being renewable energy since 2016. But that doesn't mean that it's all been hunky-dory. To date, I think Africa only accounts for only 2% of global green investments. And indeed, last year, the total increase in capacity in Africa was only 1% of global increase in renewables, which means that there is a problem. And indeed, this is despite the huge renewable energy potential that we have on the continent, which includes about 60% of what you'd call very good solar insolation globally, and more than 350 gigawatts of hydro potential. So the challenge is, number one, the first bottleneck I would want to talk about is the lack of bankable projects. I think that's a very, very big challenge that we have. And that is why the African Development Bank led in the conceptualization of what we call the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. And the idea here is that through what we call in acronym AGIA, we would be able to develop a robust pipeline of bankable projects that are able to scale up at speed the number of bankable projects and therefore the amount of megawatts of renewable energy that we are able to bring on board. So that's the first thing that we did, and this was actually launched at COP28, and that we got very strong interest of about $175 million for the project development arm of AGIA. And we hope that by Q2 of this year, when we reach financial close, we'll close at about 200 to 250 to about $300 million. Our target is $500 million because we believe with about that much money, we should be able to mobilize about $10 billion of investments of clean energy projects on the continent. The second bottleneck that I would like to highlight is the issue of perceived risk. And this here I say, it's not always based on facts. For example, Moody's Analytics in 2000 looked at projects that were developed over a 25-year period starting from 1983 to 2018 and found that in 8,000 project loans, the default rate in Africa was probably the lowest amongst globally. So it is true that there are risks, but we are probably over sensitizing the risk. But having said that projects in Africa do have their own challenges. They take too long to close, and there are other challenges that are involved with it. So, but one of the other issues, and this is probably one area where we could be able to work a lot together, is and this is less spoken, is about the size of the market on the African continent. You find that some countries are really small, maybe 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, that kind of thing. And therefore, they lack economies of scale, and therefore the projects that are developed are suboptimal. And therefore, one of the things that we've tried to address this as a bank is to try and work with the EU and I believe the EU and EC in developing what we call Africa's Continental Power Master Plan, which will be able to link the various power pools that exist on the continent. And the idea here is that this will underpin what we call the Africa Single Electricity Market. So, and I believe that in so doing, we'll be able to bring sort of transformational projects, such as we've all heard about the Inga hydropower project, which is 44,000 megawatts to fruition. There's the Baines between Angola and Namibia. That's about 600, 800 megawatts. And then, of course, there's a project like the Mega Solar that we are developing in between Namibia and Botswana, which can be between 2,000 to 5,000 megawatts. So, in my view, there are certain areas that we could really co-invest with Europe, and this is in the areas of large transformational projects, one of which is the flagship project that we run at the bank, which we call the Desert to Power, which seeks to develop up to 10,000 megawatts along what we call the Sahel region from Senegal in the west all the way to Ethiopia in the east. And here, and I would think that if we were to be able to work with EIB and maybe the EC in conceptualizing a good guarantee facility in lieu of a sovereign guarantee. For example, in the case of Inga, Inga would be at least $15 billion in investments. And therefore, if you were to finance it using in the conventional way, structured finance, you would require a sovereign guarantee that would consume almost 23% of the provident rate in the country, which is not viable. So I think those are areas that we can be able to do this. And also, importantly, on the interconnection on the continent, because I think this is one way that would be able to, for us to do large transformational projects. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Kariuki, for your remarks. I take indeed an invitation clearly to collaborate. I note from your intervention indeed that the future is a common future, and both on the African continent by uniting and by having common planning, but also with the European Union, which is a theme very close to us, especially in Europe, since we are still in the process. So that also we share in common, definitely, the need to plan better, to work better together, both on the continent and between the two continents together. I'll now turn to Mrs. De Foggia, and we were just talking about relating the continent. I think Terna has got some example of that, so maybe you want to talk to us about this and also give us your perspective on those partnerships that allow you specifically to do transnational projects and projects linking the two continents together. Let me start with that and put the ball onto your court.
Good afternoon. You are right. We will not be far from transmission point of view anymore, at least. Yeah, because the last time I met Commissioner Simpson, we were in Brussels at the PCI Energy Days. And at that event, we marked what I can only describe as an historic moment, a game changer in partnership, and also a model for how we can work together for a common cause, the energy transition. And coming to the project, ELMED is a project between Terna and STEG, our Tunisian TSO counterpart. 220 kilometers interconnection, 200 kilometers underwater at a depth of 800 meters. And it's the first direct current connection between our two continents. 307 million euros of funding from Connecting Europe facility, and this is the first time that such funding has been allocated to a country outside the EU. And I think that to meet the targets of energy transition, there will have to be many firsts like this. Now, coming to our national plan. In our national plan for climate and energy, Italy will need to add 74 gigawatts from renewables by 2030. And we are accelerating 1 gigawatt added in 2021, 3 gigawatts in 2023, and nearly 6 gigawatts in 2022, and nearly 6 gigawatts in 2023. But to continue to meet this considerable challenge, and coming back to the concept of a partnership, we have to continue to, first of all, coordinate the request, the increase of a request with the development of the network. We have to also to continue to increase the storage capacity, and we need to support our government, our administrations for the authorization process, but also for locating infrastructure efficiently. And as members of ENTSO-E, we strongly believe in partnerships, in European partnerships. And I think we need regulatory frameworks that ensure investments are attractive. We need also a supply chain organization that so that we can build networks that connect easily across borders. I remember the Prime Minister today mentioned that, and we need planning, foresight to ensure we are ready to expand, to extend those networks when renewables come online. I started mentioning PCI days. PCI, as you know, stands for Projects of a Common Interest, right?
Yes.
And our game-changing project is just an example of our wider vision, and I think that by working with a common purpose, we can reach our common goals.
Thank you very much, Mrs. De Foggia. So I take indeed from your intervention a number of themes that are now starting to recurring, increasing network capacity, helping on the faster authorization process, also to what the Commission was saying, locating infrastructure efficiently, which is a theme that is really important for us also, Europeans probably, to better plan together and cross-border links and the importance of partnerships. Okay, so we are reasonably on time, I would say. We have time for a second round of questioning, and this second round of questioning will actually focus a bit more on the financing side of things. So let me start with you, Commissioner Simpson, if I may. So on the REPowerEU and REPowerEU Plus in particular, we have a very significant effort to make in terms of bringing additional financing for renewable energy, energy efficiency, grid development. The Vice President mentioned it. EIB is contributing to that to the maximum extent. So where do you see public institutions like us, and Mrs. Vaison started talking about it, and we'll come back therefore to the theme, where do you see public institutions like us, and I will include the two European Commission and EIB together, really having to focus in terms of maximum effect to catalyze finance scale for the immense challenge ahead of us?
All our impact assessments advise us that majority of the investment necessary to clean our energy system, majority of the investments, they have to come from private sector, because the investment need is just so high that public funds are not sufficient. And in this regard, I do see that our first task is to give the guidance to private investors, and also to create a market situation where investors do see that they will have predictable revenues. And this was one of the reasons why we reopened our electricity market design legislation, well, to alleviate some of the risks for retail consumers, but at the same time also to allow clean tech sector to opt for solutions like power purchase agreements or contracts for difference, so that the necessary investments will be made. Saying that, we do know that for electrification we also need to upgrade our grids, both transmission lines and European Union as single market. We are front runners. Our member states are relatively well interconnected, but not enough. We do have still 2 member states who are still building their subsea cables to connect themselves with the rest of the European Union. And we have Iberian Peninsula, who doesn't have sufficient level of interconnection. And we do have many neighbors who one day will be part of European Union, who are very much interested to be better connected with our electricity grid. And there we really need to provide additional support for these cross-border projects, because only grid tariffs can never pay for that. And in this regard, I do have many very operational energy dialogues with our partners. To name few, for example, last week I was in Moldova. Since European Council decided to start negotiations also with Georgia. We launched a new energy dialogue with Georgia, to name few. And each time in past 2 years, I invite also EIB to be part of this dialogue because this Team Europe approach is something that gives added value to our partners. And our partners, they do want a better connection with European market because they do have great plans for renewables, but of course better connected markets will accommodate more renewables, and this is one of the reasons why all these interconnections are so popular in the past few years. And my last comment is about our global pledge. At COP28, President von der Leyen announced that a year ago, and we managed to rally a huge coalition. More than 130 countries agreed that we have to cover the increasing electricity demand globally, mainly by adding to our grids renewables. So tripling renewables by 2030 and doubling energy efficiency gains. And this is something where we do know that there are emerging markets who do need our assistance. Yes. From our side, Commission added 2.8 billion on top of existing global financing, but this is something where we really do see added value. If we help these emerging markets where not every citizen so far has access to electricity, 600 million of them in Africa, if we allow them to secure this access by providing more renewables, then we really make a difference. And this is something where private money is not leading the process. We have to act together.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So I take indeed from you, continue on the global pledges and work together, especially on the flag Team Europe, definitely. Turning to Mrs. Bartsch, and Germany is, in particular is a very large contributor to some of these initiatives. We also work together with EIB on the notion of climate, also outside of the European Union. Where do you best see, or how do you best see the way to leverage private investment through public investments that actually crowd in the private sector? How do you see it in your way best done?
Yeah, so in Germany, through the Climate and Transformation Fund, we have set aside about 212 billion euros between 2024 and 2027 for the energy transition, climate action, and the broader economic transformation. But obviously that by a long shot is not enough, and private capital, and that already was mentioned by a number of panelists, will be needed in addition. And historically in Germany, roughly about 90% of investment spending is coming from private sources. And so, as you alluded to in your question, we sort of need to use public funds very intelligently to implement the financial incentives for private investors, and using innovative approaches such as blended financing, for instance. But I would also stress it's not just about the money that private finance is important, because we already see a lot of financial market participants, private financial market participants, actively consider sustainability criteria, are keen to find green assets. But I think it's also about the ideas that the private sector brings to the discussion. So for instance, in Germany, the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee, an independent body that advises the government on sustainable finance, is publishing a series of very interesting discussion papers for startups, for SMEs, for industries that are hard to abate, for municipal infrastructure. So I think it's actually more than just the financing. It's also about the ideas, and also to some extent testing whether government policies are providing a credible framework, because one thing I think that is very important, and it's particularly important, I think, for private investors, whether they are financial investors or companies that sort of put in the hardware, is actually the credibility of the framework and the outlook, because that is what anchors the expectations and gets them to act now, as many of them do already. And I think in Germany we are to some extent in a favorable position with a large and liquid financial market, with also a national development or investment bank. But even in Germany, we couldn't do it without the EIB. And let me just, throughout the day, we have heard many great examples of cooperation and initiatives and successes. But let me just make three small suggestions of how we could evolve this further in the future. May I?
Please.
Okay. So I think one thing that we probably want to consider is sort of increasing the climate bank ambitions beyond 2025, maybe raising the climate goals and also discussing whether they should be well-defined impact goals alongside. The second idea could be to also take more considered risks to improve innovative financing, because this is an area, and to some extent Claire already mentioned this as well, where Europe is lagging behind the US. It is difficult to get some of these early stage funding. And then the third idea is, and again, that's picking up on comments that were made on a number of panels, including this one, is to really promote the transnational infrastructure projects, because I think they're absolutely key to the success of the energy transition and of Europe more broadly.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bartsch. I have to say, very clear suggestions. I can definitely tell you that we are going to increase the climate ambitions beyond 2025 as well, as far as the EIB Group is concerned. We're working also on the revision of our climate bank roadmap. We'll come with a 2.0, and some of the suggestions you have made are absolutely well made and well received, and thank you very much for that, very clear. Now turning to Dr. Kariuki, so through the Energy Fund for Africa, and you have mentioned you are unlocking private sector-led renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. You have talked about the lack of projects as a particular constraint. What is for you the role of targeted special financing vehicles in addressing particular market needs, and more generally the role you see for you and MDBs in that particular regard to try to unlock this financing and unlock these projects?
Thank you very much. I think I will respond to that question by using the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa as an example of how we can be able to the role of targeted financial vehicles in the work that we do. So the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa is a $533 million fund or special blended facility whose target is to leverage $15 billion of investments and deliver up to 10 gigawatts of generation capacity, renewable generation capacity. And it was established with the kind support of a number of donors, including Germany, Italy, and other European countries. The focus is actually on catalyzing and crowding in private sector investments by de-risking investments through availing long-term financing at affordable rates. And here, the issue of conservative financing is actually key. And the areas that SEFA, or as we call it as an acronym, focuses on is number one, what we call creating green baseload. This is creating generation that replaces baseload based from fossil fuel energy sources. An example here is there's a 44 megawatt, it's not big, but it's big for a country like Gabon. It is the first independent power project in Gabon, and it's going to be a hydro project. And therefore, by providing these resources, we actually be able to make the project deliver at affordable tariffs. That's number one. The second project is, for example, is what we call the mini grid development project in a country like in Eastern DRC. What you find is that in Eastern DRC, and this is very important, only about 1% of the population have access to electricity. And this project, by virtue of it being financed through concentrated funding and blended finance, we are able to provide very cheap capital to be able to roll out new technology. In this particular case, it may be inconceivable to most of us, but we will be providing about 300,000 people with electricity using solar mini grids. So those are fairly largish mini grids. And another example I wanted to cite is the issue of energy efficiency. As we've just heard at the COP28, the target from COP28, the target is to triple renewable energy generation and double energy efficiency. So in this particular case, through again taking that risk, the fact that we have cheap concessional funding that can take risk, we are able to finance the world's first impact investment in clean cooking, so which is huge. But I think...
Dr. Kariuki, if I may ask, on all these illustrations you're providing, are you actually de-risking completely the private sector? Are you taking all the risk off them? Are you keeping some risk with them? Are you investing in equity? They have to invest in debt? Are you subordinating the finance? How are you actually unlocking all of this?
Actually, I was going to come to that. We actually used different tools for different purposes. We do not entirely de-risk the project to zero. We still allow, if it is an IPP, so at the end of the day, there has to be equitable sharing of project risks. Yes. So what we do is to make the project more amenable to private sector participation. And what I wanted to mention is that the CEFA's catalytic role was best manifested in the last 1 year by literally saving several landmark projects on the continent from unraveling and enabling them reach financial close amidst increase in EPC prices that resulted from the impact of supply chain disruption from COVID and indeed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Here I have 3 projects that would not have met or have been proceed to financial close if it were not for CEFA. And the products here we used were, for example, reimbursable grants or fast loss equity and that kind of thing. So we had a 200 megawatt solar power project in Egypt, 100 megawatts in Tunisia, and also 35 megawatts in Chad, which would be the largest IPP in Chad. So all these 3 projects have been able to reach to financial close through various products developed by CEFA, simply by enabling the de-risking of those projects to make it sufficiently palatable to the private sector. Let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and very nice, very interesting illustrations, concrete illustrations indeed of what generally we try to do, which is to put the risk where they're best placed, actually, which remains very often the best way to make things happen. Thank you, Dr. Kariuki. Now, the last 2 intervening members of the panel on pretty much the same question. First to Mrs. Vezan. So what do you think in terms of access to finance and on the question of finance, what do you think is lacking? Is there anything lacking, and what in particular would you say we, the international financial institution and public banks, should do better or more of?
Thank you. Well, I will start by saying and stating the obvious, that indeed, like Commissioner Simpson was saying, the investment needs are huge. Most of it will come from private financing. So we need, and here I concur also with what was said, it's not all about public money coming. It's about first and foremost having a framework that encourages private money to go to the investments that are needed for energy transition. And here I would very much stress indeed that the issue of stability of the framework, previsibility are absolutely key for any private investor investing into energy transition. And sometimes we've been shaken a bit in the last few years. I think we've fair to say that with the energy crisis, governments have taken measures in Europe. The Commission has tried to coordinate them. Well, let's say that there was some heterogeneity in the responses, some difficulty to predict, so that was not ideal from an investment climate standpoint. Turning to the financing itself, well, what I would stress is that we really need to accelerate big time the developments that are needed for energy transition. Accelerate in energy efficiency and sobriety, accelerate in the development of renewables, be it electric renewables. We know that if we look at Europe, for instance, the demand for electricity will increase by 80% by 2050. The amount of renewables has to be multiplied by 6. Okay, and also renewable heat and renewable gases, because we know that for hard-to-abate sectors, we will have to rely on a variety of solutions. So the needs are absolutely huge. The good news is that when you look at companies in our sector, they are all planning to accelerate their investments, meaning that there's going to be a need for increased financing of these investments. At the same time, we are in an environment where there are some regulatory pressures on the financial system here in Europe and elsewhere, Basel IV in particular. So there is certainly a need for a diversity of financing solutions, and there is certainly scope for international financial institutions, such as the EIB, to take their share to help alleviate these financial constraints. So we really, I mean, it's not that something is lacking today. It's more, I mean, when I look at our investments, we're able to access financing, but certainly we will need more of it in the next few years, and we will need more of it because the energy transition has to accelerate. If we look only at the European continent, the emissions of greenhouse gases have declined more or less by 1% in the last few years. They're going to have to decline by 4% every year. So this gives us a sense of the acceleration that's needed.
Do you have the impression that in terms of financing needs, all the various financing sources available to energy are developed enough? I mean, for example, capital markets, the banking market, or do you think that there are still efforts to be made on some of them?
Well, we can always hope for better. And yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity to say that when we think of capital markets in particular and capital markets in Europe, and I think this has been raised in a number of occasions today, we certainly would like to see some improvement in the capital market union. Mind you, this has been, I have a previous life where I was in the French Ministry of Finance, so this is a topic I've been talking about since, well, I was going to say last century, maybe not, but almost, almost. Okay. So capital market union, to me, is clearly, doesn't mean that it would be a total game changer for energy, but as a whole, we need capital markets in Europe that function better, that are deeper, and for this, we certainly would need to see steps in the capital market union.
Thank you, Mrs. Vaison. And indeed, maybe the object of a whole day panel, actually, maybe one day. I think that subject of capital union is probably enough to fill in the whole day. Mrs. de Foggia, on your perspective, please, on the sustainable finance and on which financing instruments you think are most effective.
Well, Terna financial strategy is rooted in sustainability, which makes us an ideal partner for EIB. Let me give you two examples. Green bonds. green bonds can be very attractive to investors as part of their own sustainability strategy and more than a standard issuance, especially when the market is volatile. And when the investors appreciate the sustainability of the bond, they can be willing to accept a lower yield. We saw this when we issued a hybrid bond in 2022. Another successful financial instrument for Terna has been bank loans linked to specific ESG targets. In these targets, there is a mechanism of bonuses and penalties applied to loan interest rates. Let me conclude saying that tools such as these further reinforce the integration of sustainability targets and objectives in our financial strategy.
And maybe then a follow-up question, do you have the impression as you deploy activities in different areas and different regions that financing is always equally available everywhere? Do you have any particular difficulties when you need to finance particular projects in particular regions? Or is it really across the board and the same issue or bottleneck?
From Terna perspective, as you said, we work in different areas and we use different tools. For example, the PNRR is something that we can apply in Italy, we cannot apply somewhere else. And also we have a different situation among countries. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I think we are dead on time, actually. We are even 29 seconds ahead of schedule. We've been very good collectively to pick up on our timing. We have, ladies and gentlemen, about 10 minutes for Q&A, and otherwise we'll wrap up ahead of time, but I'm sure some of you would want to ask one or two things to our panelists, so please feel free. There are micros who are going to circulate in the room to anyone who would like to ask a question to the panel. Gentleman there at the end.
Thank you very much. My name is George Bos. I'm a startup entrepreneur, and I know that you have an interesting program, which is the European Innovation Council. And the European Innovation Council is wonderful when a startup is eligible to get in this trajectory, but the chances are only 6%. So do you also have like recommendations where other game-changing startups that are have a lot of potential too are interested to apply for or getting into a quick accelerator trajectory to go?
Okay, so this question is indeed probably addressed to the EIB in particular. You probably know that the EIB is an advisor to the European Innovation Council. So your question indeed is related to the necessary selectivity, and I understand indeed that not everybody can be done. There is an awful lot that has to be done, and thank you very much for commenting positively on this. The European Innovation Council has financed more than 400 startup companies through grants and or equity investments in Europe, which is an amazing achievement in a short period of time. There are other mechanisms that are available to the startups that would not be eligible to the EIC, amongst others, other possibilities. The Innovation Fund, also managed by the European Commission, is one of them. We can also potentially envisage venture debt investments, which is also managed as a co-finance program with the European Commission. So there are other tools, and if you don't mind, I propose maybe that we take that very specific question offline after the panel. But there are, and thank you very much for your positive comments on EIC.
Thank you very much.
Anyone? Any question? Yes? Mic is coming.
My name is George Zavos. I'm the chairman of the Hellenic Development Bank and the former deputy minister of finance of Greece. I would like to ask a question pertaining to the Capital Markets Union, which, as we've seen today, also we know is highly overdue, though it seems now it's going to be again on the political agenda. The question is how else we can finance the huge investment gap coming from the energy and green transition unless we resort to Capital Markets Union. But my question is a little more specific. Capital Markets Union means many things to many people. And probably would like to ask the participants what they have in mind as the most compelling reforms that Capital Markets Union needs in view of the forthcoming Commission. And to make it more specific, the question, what about having in Europe the institutional backbone of a Securities Exchange Commission, which the US experience has shown that is the basis for the biggest world capital market? And what about securitization as the most important tool probably of a capital markets union?
Thank you for a very interesting, at the time a bit tricky question. Is there any of our panelists who would care for commenting on the Capital Market Union? No? Commissioner?
Well, I have to excuse myself. I have been so busy solving this energy crisis that I have had no time to dedicate to give you a solution how to reform capital markets. But since we presented yesterday our plans for 2040, we also dedicated a lot of time to explain from where the money for necessary investments is coming from. So only in the energy sector, for power production and grids, and to cover the transition in the building sector and industry. Beyond 2030, we will need each year around 600 billion euros of new investment. And to put it into the perspective, this is not something unheard, because 2 years ago, in 2022, at the peak of our energy crisis, Europe paid for fossil fuel imports more than 630 billion euros to third countries. And then on top of that, our governments found more than 300 billion to compensate consumers for fossil fuel subsidies. So it makes sense to invest into the future-proof solutions that allow us to cut this vulnerability that heavy dependence on imported fossil fuels creates, and start producing some of the necessary energy here on our own ground. And on top of that, I want also to mention that this is a great opportunity for our businesses, because based on International Energy Agency's assessment, this clean tech manufacturing sector will triple within this decade. So it's around 650 billion by 2030. That gives a huge chance for growth if we will grasp this situation. So there are potential ways to finance our transition also by reducing our balance sheet on imports. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if I may add to this and to your question, I mean, some of the elements that you mentioned in there are specific objects of attention of the European Union together with the European Investment Bank. We're going to launch together with the EIF, our subsidiary specialized in SMEs, a green securitization instrument, and the first one now to be floated, because we do recognize, as you did, that securitization is an important instrument actually to pass some of the risk to the public sector, to the private sector. and to different investors, and also to mention that under the Belgian presidency of the European Union, the role of pension funds in particular and how to crowd in the pension funds, and that does not necessarily depend on the capital market union, is going to be the object of a special initiative. So some of the elements in addition to what the Commissioner mentioned. Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one additional question. No, we don't. Then let me just wrap up. Just to say on the wrap up that on what we heard today, on the theme of today, we heard a lot about predictability, credibility, framework, long-term visibility for investors. All of you mentioned this. Mrs. Bartsch saw no opposition between growth trade on the one hand and transition on the other hand. We heard about the importance of the industrial dimension and the role of the private sector on there. We heard about working together and promoting cross-border investments as a very important element in the future development. We heard about grids, blended finance. We heard about more risks for innovative financing is also one of the solutions to a common goal. And finally, about the equitable share of project risks in coming up with the best financial solutions. So I hope I summarized a little bit what was exchanged today, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and dear panelists, for the attention today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jean-Christophe. Thank you, dear panelists, for having shared your expertise with us and also insights on such an important matter as energy security.